Okay, so this week we are going to be talking about when is the best time to travel in New Zealand. So a lot of people are looking for the perfect time of the year, the best season to come for a trip to New Zealand. Should it be about the weather, the activities, and a lot of other little factors that can make a trip to New Zealand better at certain time of the year. So today we thought it'd be interesting to cover the best time of the year to come to New Zealand for a holiday. And so today we're going to go over every single season and also answer some frequently asked questions, since we have so many people contacting us through the website nzpocketguide.com, which is New Zealand's largest travel guide, and asking us questions about the best time to travel in New Zealand. So this is going to be our theme of this week. So, since you guys are a bit quiet in the chat, we're going to get the ball rolling straight away with when is the peak, the off-season, and the shoulder season in New Zealand. Also, what the hell does that mean? Laura, take it away.
Yeah, so when we talk about the off-season, the peak season, and the shoulder seasons, this is basically referring to the different seasons that tourists visit New Zealand. And it's usually a big factor for people whether tourists want to avoid, visiting New Zealand when there's tons of other people, or when, some prices can be a little bit more expensive compared to the low season. So there's a lot of factors to sort of negotiate when deciding which is the best tourist season to come to New Zealand. So we're just going to split it into the three different tourist seasons. So the first season is the peak season, or otherwise known as the high season. This is the time when the most people are traveling around New Zealand. And this peak season is from December to February, usually going into March. The next season is the shoulder season. So this actually covers two different sections of the year. And this is when, the weather is kind of on a decent area. It's usually warm enough to be comfortable. It's not quite as idyllic as summer, but definitely not as cold as winter. So it's usually the middle ground seasons. And this is when there's a little less tourists. So if you're looking for something that's a bit quieter, then you probably want to aim for the shoulder season. And these shoulder seasons run from March to June, and then again from September to November. And then finally is the low season, or basically the quiet season, the off season in New Zealand. And this is during the winter months, going from June to August. But do bear in mind that the low season, or the winter season, it also coincides with the ski season in places like Queenstown or perhaps Ohakune in the North Island. So in those towns, which are basically ski towns, that's when those towns are actually also pretty busy as well as in summer. So just a few differences there.
So Laura, is there such a thing as a rainy season in New Zealand, like in a lot of the South Pacific Islands?
So New Zealand doesn't really have a wet season like tropical countries in the South Pacific. However, there are drier months to aim for if you are really trying to avoid the rain. Although it is kind of hard in New Zealand, it does rain on and off all the way through the year. But if you're looking for the driest months to visit New Zealand, then that tends to be January and February. While the wettest months, if you want to avoid coming to New Zealand during the wettest months, they are usually May, June, July, and August.
All right.
All right, so shall we move on to our theme of the week? Once again, going through the different seasons of when's the best time to travel to New Zealand, starting with summer, the busy season of New Zealand. So summer is the months of December, January, and February. And this is considered the high season to travel in New Zealand. In other words, the busiest season. And for the weather, it's also the warmest time of the year to travel to New Zealand. So just to give you a few ideas of temperatures, in the North Island, temperatures are usually around 20 to 24 degrees Celsius, which in Fahrenheit is 68 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. In the South Island, it's a little bit cooler, usually between 19 to 23 degrees Celsius or 66 to 73 degrees Fahrenheit. And in terms of rainfall, It's one of the less rainy seasons. Usually, not in 2023, but usually it's usually less rainfall. So in the North Island, it's about 60 to 100 millimeters per month. So that's 2.4 to 3.9 inches. And then in the South Island, the rainfall is usually between 35 to 60 millimeters per month. That's 1.4 to 2.4 inches.
So summer is by far the most popular time to visit New Zealand. January and February, as Laura mentioned, are the hottest months of the year. And so the weather is generally at its best, and it's obviously best for outdoor activities. Obviously, we are recording this in 2023. We have had one of the worst summer on record, so it can vary from year to year. Now, the issue with summer is that it is the most crowded time of the year. So tourists will have to book their trip to New Zealand in advance, have to book some activities and have to book some accommodation to avoid disappointment, especially around the Christmas time of the year. So again, summer in New Zealand, as opposed to the Northern Hemisphere, summer in New Zealand is January, February and March. So therefore, December, January, February. Ooh, I almost made a mistake right here. So therefore, for that reason, we also have the peak travel seasons anywhere in the world, which is Christmas time, which is right in the middle of summer or hot season. So do be aware that you have to book things in advance. So there is also some school holidays, so do expect to have kids kind of roaming around campsites and also joining tours for sure. Now, all of this activity in summer comes with also slightly higher price. So summer is traditionally the most expensive time to travel in New Zealand, with car rentals, flight and hotel rates usually being at their highest. Now, Laura, is there some best places to visit in New Zealand in summer?
We can certainly give some recommendations. So a good sort of summery place to experience when it is at its warmest sort of temperatures and sunniest weather is the Bay of Islands in the North Island, mainly because of its beautiful beaches and islands you can visit. There's also New Plymouth if you want to get maybe off the beaten track, away from the tourist crowds, then New Plymouth in the North Island would be a good option. Gisborne, also in the North Island, has some great beaches, yet is off the beaten track, so getting away from the main tourist centres. Mount Maunganui is another beautiful sort of beach, but also in the city as well. So if you want a mix of sort of city life and beaches, water sports, that sort of thing, then Mount Maunganui is a good one to go for. And then finally, Waiheke Island, which is just off the coast of Auckland, has beautiful vineyards and again beaches, all that good summery stuff. So that's usually a good place to visit in summer.
All right, so now let's talk about the pros and the cons, right? And let's start with the advantages of traveling in New Zealand in summer. So the most obvious advantage is that you're getting great weather, or at least better weather than the rest of the year traditionally. As Laura has mentioned, the weather is best in New Zealand in summer. And if you are really looking for sun when traveling in New Zealand, the sunniest regions in New Zealand in summer are the Auckland region, Northland, Hawke's Bay, and the Marlborough regions. Nevertheless, the weather in New Zealand is extremely changeable. As I mentioned before, we just have wrapped up a really terrible summer. So make sure to pack some layer and pack a very good rain jacket when you travel in New Zealand in summer. Another a great advantage to traveling in New Zealand in summer is the fact that a lot of the activities, accommodations, and everything are guaranteed to be open, right? Even some places like more off the beaten track in New Zealand have some operators that literally just run their business in summer only. So if you want the full breadth of what New Zealand has to offer, usually summer is the best time. Now that doesn't mean that in the other seasons you won't be able to do everything you want to do. This is more limited to off the beaten track places, but it is something worth considering if there is some really peculiar, very, very hidden gems things that you want to do in New Zealand. Another great advantage to travel in New Zealand in summer is that there is plenty of festivals. There is some music festivals, and if you plan on either joining up on one of them or even volunteering in one of them if you are traveling on a working holiday visa, For instance, that may be a great time of the year to do that. And speaking of the working holiday visa, if you are coming here as a backpacker in New Zealand and want to make the most of that visa, there is a wealth of seasonal job in the horticulture or even tourism and hospitality industries where you can find a lot of jobs then. So that is why it's a great time of the year to be there when on a working holiday visa. Now let's talk about the disadvantages of visiting in New Zealand in summer. And there's really only little, right? First up, it's the busy season, so you will have to share New Zealand with much more people. Some places that usually are going to be really empty at that point, they may be more busy, and you will basically have to share New Zealand. While in a lot of the other time of the year when you travel, you very often can go on a walk and feel like you've got New Zealand all to yourself. So you are less likely to have this feeling just then. So yeah, that's one of the points. The next point that you want to keep in mind is that, well, with this busy busy New Zealand, it means that you will have to book more in advance. So if you are more of a kind of spontaneous traveler and want to come to New Zealand and book things as you go, well, summer may not be at the ideal time for you to travel, as a lot of tourism operators are still relatively small in New Zealand, and therefore when they're fully booked, well, they're fully booked and you're missing out on their tours. So do bear that in mind and book things that you absolutely want to do in summer a little bit more in advance. And finally, the last point that I'm going to make is prices. Well, summer is the most expensive time in the year to travel around New Zealand, as we mentioned before, but especially around Christmas time, where flights are the most expensive, both local and international flights. So domestic and international flights are the most expensive. So do bear that in mind if you're planning to travel around New Zealand. Budget for summer and budget a little extra.
Yeah, all right. Let's get back to our next section of the best time to travel in New Zealand. Now going on to the autumn season of New Zealand. So autumn is the months of March, April and May, and this is considered the high to shoulder tourist season for New Zealand, mainly because March is right at the end of summer, so it is usually a little busier at March, but then as it goes into April and May, that's when sort of the tourist numbers die off and it becomes more of the shoulder season in New Zealand. So in terms of weather, in the North Island, the temperature is usually between 17 to 22 degrees Celsius as the highs throughout the day, and that's 62 to 71 degrees Fahrenheit. And in the South Island, obviously, chillier once again with 13 to 19 degrees Celsius, which is 55 to 66 degrees Fahrenheit. And then in terms of rainfall per month, the figures are usually between 90 to 130 millimeters, which is 3.5 to 5.1 inches in the North Island. And then in the South Island, it's between 60 to 100 millimeters, which is 2.4 to 3.9 inches.
All right, so we're going to say hi to a new Lauren, by the way. There is Kiwi Lauren and a new Lauren. We'll look at your comment in a minute, Lauren. So talking about traveling in New Zealand in autumn, if you're looking for a little bit of a quieter time in New Zealand, that may be, that may be one of the good times to travel in New Zealand, because in autumn you're also going to experience some decent weather alongside with it, which is quite good. New Zealand will still feel a little busy in March. The summer season still tend to extend toward March, but definitely will quiet down between April and May. So for this reason, Laura and I actually usually consider April and May our favorite time of the year to travel around New Zealand, as the price of car rental, flight and hotel tend to go a little bit more down, which is always pretty good, and the weather is still comfortable for traveling in New Zealand. Also, if you happen to travel, around the areas of Arrowtown, and you're going to be able to start seeing the changing colors of the trees in New Zealand, which makes it absolutely fantastic. But speaking of the best places to travel around New Zealand in autumn, here's Laura.
Okay, so starting with Wanaka, this is a really good time to visit Wanaka because there's a lot of introduced trees and stuff in Wanaka. So when it's autumn, that means that there are changing colours in the landscape. So if you want to, see see Wanaka in this sort of autumn colours of like browns and oranges, then that's a good time to go. Hawke's Bay is in the North Island, and autumn's a good time to visit because that's sort of wrapping up the sort of harvest season after its sort of big fruit picking industry has undergone all its sort of work, and it's also a huge winemaking part of New Zealand as well. So just visiting at this time of year is usually where it's really buzzing. There's a lot going on there. The Mackenzie region, so talking about places like Lake Tekapo and Twizel, is a really good time to visit that area because usually in summer it's really busy in those areas, but you can go and experience this really popular hotspot when it is, less busy. You can do the walking trails of the area with the weather still usually being pretty decent. Gisborne is another one to visit because the weather's usually favourable. It's a wine making region as well, so there's a lot going on there at this time of year. And then finally, Marlborough, again, a really the biggest winemaking region in New Zealand. So there's usually a lot going on and a lot of sort of events happening in Marlborough. And the weather is really idyllic. It's one of the sort of warmest, driest climates of New Zealand. So if you want to get some really good weather, despite it even being in the shoulder season, then Marlborough is a good one to hit.
All right, so let's go over the pros and cons of traveling in New Zealand in autumn like we've done for summer. So let's start with the pros of traveling in New Zealand in autumn. And as Laura just mentioned, obviously the weather is definitely a pro. The weather is still very nice. It's actually a little cooler than it is in summer. So in my personal opinion, it makes it even better for experiencing the New Zealand outdoor. So you can make the most out of New Zealand outdoor without completely overheating when doing some epic hikes such as the Tongariro Crossing, which has little to no shelters. Another great thing about traveling in autumn is obviously the stunning colors of the New Zealand forest. If you're coming to travel in New Zealand, you're probably coming in the country to experience what the New Zealand outdoors look like, right? It is one of the main draws to come to New Zealand, and that draws people, to come to New Zealand, and therefore, if you want to experience like a full breadth of the color palette, well, maybe autumn is the best time to come. We've been talking a lot about the summer crowds. Well, the summer crowds are dwindling when traveling in New Zealand in autumn. So you get that feeling, you start getting that feeling of getting New Zealand all to yourself. You get that feeling of seeing very little amount of people on the New Zealand tracks. And also it will give you some flexibility when booking your trip. As there is less people, accommodations and activities are less likely to be fully booked. And therefore you have a little bit more room to be a bit more spontaneous when choosing to explore New Zealand. Between March and May, it's considered the shoulder season in New Zealand, right? As we mentioned before. And so that means that most of the vehicle rentals, some activities and accommodation providers will actually get their price to go down. This is when the tourism businesses are trying to attract more tourists with usually better deals for them as the summer is slowly dwindling. And in March, there is also quite a few events in New Zealand, some world famous events, I must say, in the country. So you may want to make the most of it if you're traveling. And if you're here backpacking in New Zealand and you're working holiday visa, they are great places to go volunteering. Now, if we were to have a bit of a look at the disadvantage of traveling in New Zealand in autumn, so the cons basically. So one of the cons is that the days are getting a little shorter in comparison to summer. So you have a little bit less daylight to enjoy New Zealand, and it's also a little chillier. So if you're coming from a hot country, let's say you're coming from India or you're coming from Northern Africa, for example, or South Africa, and you are still expecting to get some like warm weather, well, do be aware that it's going to get significantly colder, especially around the tail end of autumn. Also, the last con that I'm going to have is the fact that the peak season in New Zealand is getting longer. So now March is maybe not even considered shoulder season just yet. And so therefore you may have to wait for April to start seeing those prices going down. So do be aware that kind of autumn and then this like known fact that the prices are going down, it's kind of getting a little shorter.
All right, let's move on to another season of the best time of the year to travel to New Zealand. Moving on to winter now. So winter is the months of June, July, and August in New Zealand, and this is considered the low season or the off season, or basically the least busiest time for tourists to travel to New Zealand. In terms of weather, the North Island temperatures are usually the highs are between 11 to 15 degrees Celsius, which is 51 to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. In the South Island, this is usually 7 to 12 degrees Celsius, or 44 to 53 degrees Fahrenheit. And then in terms of rainfall on the North Island, rainfall per month is usually between 120 to 150 millimeters, which is 4.7 to 5.9 inches. And then in the South Island, a tad bit less, with 70 to 130 millimeters, which is 2.8 to 5.1 inches.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about traveling in New Zealand in winter. So definitely it's going to be cool and crisp in some of the drier region of New Zealand, and definitely wet and mild in most of the coastal areas of New Zealand. And again, New Zealand is the country 10th on the list of the countries in the world with the highest amount of coastline. So we do have a lot because we're a very, very, very small country. Okay, so winter is not necessarily ideal for outdoor activities as you will experience the inevitable rainfalls of New Zealand. Nevertheless, it gives you some amazing vistas with snow-covered peaks and pretty much nobody in the country. You want that feeling of having the whole country to yourself? This is the time of the year to travel in New Zealand for sure. On top of it, if you're traveling in New Zealand on a budget, the price of car rentals, hotels and flights are usually at the lowest. And yeah, if you're wondering, July is by far the coldest month in New Zealand.
All right, moving on to the best places to visit during winter in New Zealand. A good one to hit would be Queenstown, as it is during the ski season in New Zealand. So the town is usually really, really buzzing, but also if you want to try some snow sports, then that's a good time to go. Rotorua is another option. If you want to have an excuse to warm up, there's a lot of geothermal activity in Rotorua. So there's plenty of hot pools, geothermal parks with, the steam to warm you up and that sort of thing. So that is even arguably better to see in winter, where you can actually see that steam against the cold air a lot better during this time. Ohakune on the North Island is the main sort of ski town for the Mount Ruapehu area, for the ski fields there. So that's usually at its busiest, and usually lots of things happening, nightlife, restaurants, that sort of thing, also happening during the winter season in Ohakune. Arthur's Pass on the South Island is sort of famously really pretty during the winter season. If you're doing the Transalpine train journey, or even just driving through, doing a few of the waterfall hikes, that sort of thing, then that's a really pretty time to go and visit that area on the South Island. And then finally, on the South Island, Hanmer Springs is famous for having the largest hot pools complex in the country, so it's brilliant to go visit during winter. But they also have a couple of very small ski fields there, and lots of extra sort of adventure activities that you can do in winter also.
All right, so let's go over some pros or advantages of traveling in New Zealand in winter. And the first one that comes to mind is obviously the snow. The snow will completely transform the landscapes and makes for very unique pictures of New Zealand. We do love the snow, and it really makes a trip to New Zealand exceptional with, snow-capped mountains and even like a lot more. The snow also brings snow activities. If you've never skied before, or if you've never skied on the southern hemisphere before, or if you skied before and you really like it, well, you'll be able to experience skiing in New Zealand. Our ski fields tend to be much smaller than what you can experience in North America and in Europe, and it gives a very different feel to your skiing holiday. You may want to schedule that for 1 day, 2 days, or even do a complete snow experience in New Zealand. There's still plenty of festivals in New Zealand in winter, by the way, especially with the Great Winter Festival, which is quite famous. So another pro about traveling in New Zealand in winter is that, except for like Queenstown and Wanaka, which are going to be busy ski resort at that time of the year, a lot of the rest of the New Zealand is going to be completely off season. So pretty much no accommodations, no activity is going to be fully booked. All the prices are going to be at their lowest, especially for car rental. This is when you're going to be able to save a lot of money on your transportation. and it will often feel like you have the whole country to yourself. I was talking about that in both of the previous seasons. Yeah, it's definitely a fantastic time to take advantage of when traveling in New Zealand. Now, the good thing about winter in New Zealand as well is that a lot of the main activities that you expect to do in New Zealand are still open. And usually you'll be able to share those activities with much less people. There are some videos of us on this channel of us doing whitewater rafting with literally just the two of us and the guide. We had the whole place to ourselves, the whole river to ourselves. That was exceptional. And we did that during winter in New Zealand. However, keep in mind that some activities may be cancelled due to bad weather and kind of rescheduled. But I'm going to be talking about that when I'm going to be talking about the cons of traveling in New Zealand in winter right now. Okay, so some of the cons of traveling in New Zealand, and in my personal opinion, they're very limited, right? The main one is the fact that the weather is usually very unpredictable and extremely inconsistent. So you need to keep in mind that things may need to be rescheduled. You may get a downpour right on top of you as you are doing a hike. So you kind of need to come prepared, right? You will need to have a little bit of leeway for those activities such as your heli hike on the glacier, your skydiving, your sailing, your canyoning. You need to have a little bit of leeway to be able to reschedule it, usually by one day, sometimes even just half a day, sometimes just a few hours. But keep that in mind. Also, make sure that you pack a really good rain jacket. Make sure, speaking about packing, one of the cons of traveling in New Zealand is that you will need to make sure that you pack correctly for the weather. You're gonna need to have some warm clothes, so you will have a slightly larger pack when coming to New Zealand in winter, and this is worth keeping in mind.
All right, thanks for that, Robin. All right, moving on to our final month to talk about for the best time to travel to New Zealand, and we are now moving on to spring. So spring is is inclusive of the months of September, October and November, and this is considered the low to shoulder season of visiting New Zealand, of the tourist season. And then in terms of temperatures in the North Island, it's usually between highs of 16 to 20 degrees Celsius, which is 60 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. On the South Island, it's usually around 13 to 19 degrees Celsius, which is 55 to 66 degrees Fahrenheit. And then in terms of rainfall, it can be anywhere between 90 to 120 millimeters per month on the North Island, which is 3.5 to 4.7 inches. And then in the South Island, that rainfall can be anywhere between 60 to 100 millimeters, which is 2.4 to 3.9 inches.
All right, so traveling in spring in New Zealand gives this really cool, refreshing feel, right? This is really when, first the clock goes forwards, the day gets longer. That's always pretty good. And in early spring, you still can experience a little bit of those winter sport, and you still have a little bit of snow. You can still see snow on top of the mountains. Even if you are arriving a little bit late spring, you can still see some snow, which is really cool. But in October is really when spring starts again, when the lambing season starts in New Zealand. If you don't know what lambs are, I still get this question from time to time. This is baby sheep. So you can see those fields dotted with lamb, which is really, really cute. Although that means that the lambing season is in full swing, and therefore some walking trails may be closed, as some walking trails pass through lamb fields, and they have to be closed during that time of the year. New Zealand also doesn't feel too busy until about mid-November, and around mid-November, this is when the price kick back up again. But just before mid-November, it's like pretty cool to travel around New Zealand and still get that feeling of that place all to yourself that I love saying.
All right, let's talk about some of the best places to visit during spring, starting with Lake Tekapo. If you want to see those purple lupins that feature in all the Instagram shots, then around November is the time to go and check out Lake Tekapo. And but it's usually also pretty busy, so it's Lake Tekapo after all. It is a hot spot on the South Island. Rotorua is a good place to visit during spring. basically there's so much to do in Rotorua that there'll be something awesome to do, yet it's also the low to shoulder season, so although it's usually a busy tourist hotspot, it'll be a little less busier in spring, and you can check out those hot pools, geothermal parks, mountain biking, redwood forests, doing zip lining or whitewater rafting. There's so much to do there, so spring is a great time to visit. Hamilton is home to the famous Hamilton Gardens, which is, in my opinion, one of the best public gardens you can visit in New Zealand. And obviously spring, when the flowers are blooming, is the best time to visit. Kaikoura is a wildlife hotspot, so very famous for its sperm whales, for its dolphins, seals, all the amazing marine wildlife. So if you visit during spring, it's usually when, there's a little bit more wildlife activity, and that's a good time to go visit. And then finally, Canterbury, which is a huge region on the South Island. This is a big farming region, so there's usually there's a mixture of different sort of farm animals. So yeah, you can see as you're passing through. Also, very lush green environment as well. So it's a good time to visit that area.
All right, so some of the pros or advantages of traveling in New Zealand in spring. First up, this is usually the best time of the year to hit the slopes. The sun is coming back and there's still a lot of snow in New Zealand. At times, you can go all the way to the end of September. Not always, but it can go all the way to the end of September, which is really, really good. The weather is getting a little bit better. You get the temperatures going a little bit more up. You get a little bit more sun and you get slightly longer days, which is always good. But spring is still the shorter season. So accommodations and activities tend to not be fully booked yet. Prices are not on the up just yet. So you can still allow yourself to be a little bit more spontaneous, both budget-wise and organizationally wise, which is always quite good when you travel around and your heart may be tempted to go do something you didn't even know existed. That happens often in New Zealand. Now, some parts of New Zealand, as Laura mentioned, around Lake Tekapo or even the beautiful Hamilton Garden, are in full blossoms in spring in New Zealand. So you're going to get plenty of opportunities to enjoy the stunning flowery landscape that New Zealand has to offer. And on top of that, last thing to mention is that New Zealand is best seen in spring if you are into the wildlife. It's kind of well known all around the world. This is when the wildlife is the most active, and man, that is really amazing in New Zealand. From both the marine wildlife to, again, the
bird life, or
how do you say the animal domesticated wildlife, such as sheep and cows and everything like that, and obviously the bird life, as Laura was mentioning. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. Now, there is some cons to traveling in New Zealand in springs, but they are very, very small. First up, there are fewer events going on. I've been talking about events pretty much every time. And yeah, in summer, in winter, plenty of events. In March, which is in the middle of autumn, plenty of events. But when it comes down to spring, there is very little left. And that's usually due to the weather, which is the second and last cons in traveling in New Zealand in spring, is that this is probably the time of the year with autumn where the weather is the most inconsistent. So you're going to have some few rainy days, you're going to have some chilly, super crisp day, and then you're going to have some really hot days, and it's going to be a little bit all over the place. So you have to bear with New Zealand and find its footing to give you epic weather for summer. All right. Speaking of Fabio, there is a segment that Fabio really likes, so I think we should go over that.
Okay, let's go.
Robin thinks at times. Okay, so today the thing that I'm thinking about is that there are too many people that are planning a trip to New Zealand around the weather. The weather in New Zealand, as we've seen in all the different segments that we talked about today, all the different seasons, is super changeable and extremely unpredictable. So you can't really expect the New Zealand weather to stick to the chart that we have on our site and the prediction that have been made, using 10 years worth of data, which is kind of what we're doing. It won't be that. We've seen that literally in 2023 when we have had one of the worst summer that we had in record, right? So what you should do instead of planning your trip around the weather is to plan what you're packing around all kind of weather, and therefore you'll be able to make the most of New Zealand. One of the main reasons why people are coming to New Zealand is its amazing landscape. It's a stunningly adventurous landscape, which wouldn't be there if the weather wasn't as wet as it is in New Zealand. It is called a rainforest for a reason. You can't expect to travel in a country full of rainforest and experience the best that the rainforest has to offer without getting some goddamn rain. So that will happen to you, and that shouldn't dampen your spirits. That should actually just make you feel like you truly experience New Zealand, experience the most that New Zealand has to offer from both sunny weather and rainy weather. So when coming to New Zealand, make sure that you pack, warm clothes, weatherproof clothes, waterproof clothing, really good rain jacket, and actually experience the country for what it truly is, rather than trying and hoping and feeling disappointed if you're coming to New Zealand without experiencing beautiful sunny days. It rains a lot in New Zealand. We learn to live with that as New Zealanders, right? So if you're coming to experience our country, do understand that you may have to live with the rain as well. And so by trying and forcing yourself to come to New Zealand in summer, you are forcing yourself into the highest of all the price brackets, the busiest of all the time of the year, and you do not have a guarantee that you're not going to have beautiful weather all the time. You still will get some rain in summer in New Zealand. So plan your travel around what you want to experience in New Zealand, plan what you pack around all the time of weather, and don't plan around just what kind of weather you want to get. It will get cold, it will get rainy, it will get sunny, it will get hot. It's New Zealand, and it's the weather in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've spoken and I've thought.
Yes, that is thought. Fabio was saying, I want to have a Laura knows section.
Oh, yeah, that'd be better.